Hey everyone, it's Steph. Thanks for tuning in today. Today we're going to be talking about a new book to me. It's been out for a while, it's been talked about, and I thought instead of just reading this book for myself, why not kind of tell you about this experience and kind of make it into a little series called Is It Worth the Hype? So we're going to see today if the book The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, we're going to see if this book is worth the hype. So stay tuned. So this book is told from two points of view, Alicia, and then we have Theo. Alicia is an artist, and Theo is a psychotherapist. In the beginning of the story, Alicia has murdered her husband. This event took place 6 years ago, and now she's in a mental institution. She no longer speaks. She has not spoken since the incident has occurred. So she has just kind of like shut down and not interacted with anyone in her mental institution, and this is just where she's at. Everything we see from her point of view is a flashback to a journal that she kept prior to the murder. So we get to see kind of what her thoughts were and what the events were in her life leading up to this tragic event. Then we see Theo as a psychotherapist. He is arriving at this mental institution, hoping to get to work with Alicia and help her to speak. He is applying for the job, interviewing, and then his transition as he is accepted to this job, what he's like as he starts working with Alicia. We slowly start to see how that progresses with Theo's relationship with the people around him in the mental institution. And then we see Alicia's flashbacks in her journal leading up to the murder of her husband. This does deal with themes of mental health, art therapy, and art in general because she's an artist, so it talks about her development as it talks about how art can kind of allow the spectator to see a different side of a person or kind of get to know them in a different way than just verbalizing words, and how we can kind of see into their soul or into their heart by looking at a piece of artwork that they create versus the words that they're saying or not saying out in the world. Thought-provoking. It is a little bit heavy, especially in the beginning when he first arrives to the mental institution. Initially, I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to read this book. I thought it would be like, I don't know if that's really my jam. And then, oddly enough, my grandma was reading this for book club and telling me about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's been on my radar for so long. Like, I've heard about it. I need to see if this is like actually worth the hype. Let's check it out and then we can talk about it together. So that was my real push for getting to read this book, and I'm glad that I did. It was a fast read. I listened to it on audio. I listened to the bulk of this in one day, but I had it on a lot while I was doing chores around the house. So hey, whatever works. I'm feeling like what's-her-face from Fantastic Beasts with this hair today, and I am totally okay with that. All right, moving back to what we were talking about. This is a book that you definitely want to keep reading. You want to keep seeing what happens next. It's like, okay, you have my attention. Where is this going? What is the purpose to this? I'm trying to keep this spoiler free, so I am going to talk in vague terms about the twist so that I don't give it away to anyone who hasn't read it yet. The twist took place with about an hour or so left of the audiobook, so I had time to process it and kind of see, like, put pieces together, because once you get to the twist, you're like, what? And I will say that I suspected the twist. It wasn't totally unpredictable for me, but I've read other books in this genre. It might not be as predictable for someone who doesn't read that genre. That being said, I still found the twist to be eye-opening, kind of like, what? Well, I had anticipated somewhat what had occurred. Once we heard that twist, it was much more detailed and much more intricate and complex than I had anticipated. So that was a really, really interesting kind of mind-blowing part of the book. So it definitely keeps you on your toes throughout this book, and you do really need that time after the twist is revealed to kind of process what you're hearing, as well as understanding how did that happen? How did everything come together to lead to that moment, and what now? The ending left me wanting just a little bit more from this timeline of, okay, what happens after this book is done? Trying to say no spoilers. So I will just leave it at that. I kind of wanted just a little bit more from this book, but it definitely kept my attention. It definitely kept me engaged. It surprised me, and it kept my attention for the entirety of the book. So it does include themes of mental health, some language and violence. If that's not your cup of tea, then I wouldn't recommend this book to you. But is it worth the hype? Let's see. It did start off a little slow for me. It did have this dark, obviously we're dealing with a murder. We're dealing with heavy mental health issues. There is past trauma in both their childhoods. They had toxic relationships with some of their parents and family members. That does influence these two who are now adults in this story. And it makes sense sequentially why these characters will grow up to be the way that they are. But if that is not something you want to read right now with the pandemic going on, or just with life in general, you don't have to. And that's all good. We're just checking it out to see if it's really worth the hype. So, am I glad I read it? Yes. Would I read it again? Probably not. But I'm glad I got to see what this book was all about. It was a fast read, and it kept me engaged with the mystery suspense element and wanting to know what happened, and it kept my attention throughout the book. So I rated this 3.5 stars. Because of the heavy topic, I'm not quite giving it 4, but it was an entertaining read and a good read, and I will say that it is worth the hype. So I'm glad that I read this. I'm glad I got to check it out. The twist was unique, left the reader with a lot to process, and we had this great tragedy going on that inspired the story, which made it an even more interesting element. So that wraps up our video for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.